So before we start, have just a couple kind of testimonies of personal experience to share with you. Yesterday I was working with my bees, and I was out. Actually, I wasn't actually working with the bees. I just drove by the bees on my lawn tractor, and there was this one when I got off where I was going to do some work. There was this one bee that was just persistently kind of buzzing around my head. It was kind of a little on the annoying side, and I took my ear protectors off, and just a couple of seconds later, bing, I got zapped right inside the ear by a bee. And so I was like, all right, I'm way out here at the garden. What do I do? Well, it's kind of early for plantain to be blooming, but there could be some around. And I remember there was a big plant that I had saved in the garden, and I went over to it quickly and found a number of nice green leaves, and just kind of ground those up in my hand until they were kind of moist and juicy, and stuffed them in my ear and put my ear protectors back on. And it's still swollen today, a little bit itchy, but I would say within about 5 to 10 minutes or less, it was down to almost, just I knew something had happened. It wasn't a sting that was persistent. So I think that the plantain poultice just in the field just really was helpful. It was plantain. So it's a narrow leaf plantain, also sometimes known as buckhorn plantain, and it's a medicinal herb that is frequent in lawns that aren't succumb to weed killer. So it's fairly prevalent. And there's also the broadleaf plantain, which has similar medicinal properties, just has a broader leaf to it and a shorter spike. And we've talked about it in the past, and can address it again in the future as well. I'm sure we will. But that was just a personal use. And so that just kind of brings to point, whenever we're outside around anywhere, just be observant, look around, see what's around you, notice what's around you. I was in my garden, I knew that I had plantain nearby, and I went and got it right away and was able to abate the sting of the bee. But if you don't know what's around you, and if you don't know what to look for, so part of what this is about is helping to learn what to look for. And another thing, our neighbor over behind us here had, we met them last Monday outside. They were moving some wood, and she had some company over the weekend. They kind of had the sniffles, and sure enough, she came down with it after they left. So just evidently just a kind of a cold. That was the symptoms she was manifesting. They had both been recipients of some of the recent shots, but so we just talked a little bit, and I suggested that she use half a lemon and about 4 cloves of garlic blended up in about 4 ounces of water, and drink that. That's nature's penicillin that we've learned about from time to time. And she did it. A couple days later, I just called to check on her, and her husband had seen me outside and said, "Hey, that stuff was great. It worked like a charm." And she took it like 3 times that day that I told her about it, and then a couple times the next day, and she was done. That was it for whatever it was that was creeping up on her. So just a testament to the power of natural remedies to have available and to use and to share. It's just the truth about the simple in medicine. And I told her it was called nature's penicillin, and she said, "I'll remember that." So hopefully they can have that in their tool bag. So I've entitled this section, "Thou preparest a table before me." That's from Psalms 23, and is talking specifically about wild harvest of edible wild plants. And we'll do a number of different examples of this through the course of the next few weeks here. But there'll also be some examples of different medicinal contexts as well as edible contexts. So just a reminder of our reminder that this is an educational kind of time together, and that if there are things here that are helpful from a medicinal standpoint, that you're welcome to use them, but do your own research specifically about them as you partner with your healthcare professionals that have a similar philosophy of healing that you do, and just use them as toolboxes or tools in your toolbox that you can use to help yourself and others. So the first herb that I wanted to kind of focus on tonight is lamb's quarters. Now, it's a little bit early this time of year for lamb's quarters to be coming up, but the seedlings will be there and they will be present. They're a very common weed. In fact, I looked at a chart of their growth patterns, and they're all across the US and Canada, everywhere. So it is ubiquitous. Not every garden has it, but it will grow in every region. It's also known as wild spinach, goosefoot, fat hen, and essentially those names and lamb's quarters comes from the fact that it was often eaten by livestock and used to fatten them up and bulk up their diets, and it was eaten by livestock in a large way. All of it is edible. The root can be used too, but not from an edibility standpoint. But the leaves, the growing tips of the stems, the buds, the seeds can all be eaten. So it's very, very tender. Kind of has a slightly waxy coat on the leaf. It loves disturbed soils. It has a very wide distribution, as I mentioned, and as a weed goes, it's very common. It can be very short. It can get very tall. You can see a fairly tall garden bed full of it right on the lower right hand of our screen here. Also known as wild spinach, which is what many people in the wild edibles circles prefer to call it, because it has less of the livestock connotations associated with it. So it's high in a variety of nutrients. So fiber helps one be regular, has a lot of beta carotene, otherwise known as vitamin A, vitamin C, riboflavin. It's actually one of the highest plant sources of calcium. Zinc, copper, manganese are all minerals that tend to have a high presence in lamb's quarters. It does have the presence of oxalates, just like spinach does. If you ate excessive amount of spinach, you could have potentially some issues with the oxalates in spinach. It can tend to bind some calcium, but in lamb's quarters there is lots and lots of calcium available, so it's not going to minimize that extensively. Cooking renders the oxalates less active and makes the other minerals more bioavailable. So if you're growing lamb's quarters, if you're actually intentionally raising lamb's quarters and nurturing it along, if you keep it well watered and nourished, it'll continue to put out leaves. As soon as it becomes stressed, it'll start putting out flowers and then go to seed. So you want to keep it as unstressed as possible in order to maintain its viability and growing status. So other things that can trigger the onset of seed production and the reduction of new leaf production is cold, drought, if you're over harvesting it, and of course, just as the season wears on, it will go into dormancy over the winter. It'll die off. The rootstock will still be there, and the seeds will spread. Pictures of the seeds are here. They're very, very tiny. In fact, they're tinier than quinoa seeds. They're probably more along the line of amaranth seeds. So very, very tiny. One nice thing about it from a gardening standpoint, if you're actually cultivating it, is that bugs don't care for it. So you don't have to worry about bugs eating it. Unlike other things that we try to grow, it can be eaten raw or cooked. It usually is clean at harvest because it has a light waxy coat on it that keeps things from adhering to it. It's not noticeably waxy. It will repel water like most things do, but it's not an obtrusive waxy coat in any sense of the imagination. Harvesting it stimulates growth. So harvesting it keeps it producing new leaves, and then keeping it nourished and watered well continues to kind of lengthens out that time, a period where it can produce or will produce leaves. So it's great to eat as a salad on its own, although it does have a tartness to it. Adding a dressing of some kind of takes the edge off that. If you do a mixed green salad with other greens, it blends in well with that and adds dimension to your salad as far as flavor goes. If you're harvesting it in mass quantities, like if you're going to freeze it or otherwise preserve it, you can just grab the stem down low on the plant and pull upward, and it just strips the leaves right off. You can, if you have a bowl of cool water nearby, you can just plop them into that, and it'll help keep them hydrated and maintain their freshness. If you don't, they'll tend to wilt fairly quickly. So that would be for cooking versus a salad. And you can cook it up just like spinach and have it available to eat in just that same way. So spinach salad or spinach and other types of spinach dishes are great for lamb's quarters. So here's an example of the collected leaves in a colander. Just a light rinse will take care of it. The flower cluster is up in the upper right. So once it's been stressed, it'll begin to produce these flower clusters. You can actually make a tea from the buds. And the tender ones can be harvested and eaten too, but they will tend to get tougher as they age, as they're pollinated. They don't get any more showy than this. They're just a green flower that then will produce lots and lots of tiny seeds. So it self-seeds very well, which gardeners know because it is considered a weed because it does grow so perniciously. But if it's edible, it's okay to have around. So know that it does compact significantly when you take those leaves and cook them down, like spinach does and other greens that you tend to cook. They do cook down from a high volume into a low volume very rapidly. So the more open the buds become and the more seed development there is that takes place, the more bitter they will become because they have the presence of some compounds called saponins, which is what quinoa has on them too. And before using quinoa, you usually rinse it or soak it to get those saponins off. Oftentimes the water will be a little bit soapy-like, so they do have kind of a sudsy component to them. I'll talk about that a little bit more down the line here. So you can use them raw, you can use them in salads, you can use them in smoothies. So green smoothies, green drinks, and juices. Also just grab some as you go by on the trail as a trailside snack. Like all dark green leafy vegetables, they can help prevent cancer, help reduce inflammation, reduce diabetes risk, and build strong bones. And strong bone building is significant, particularly in lambsquarters, because it does have a high level of calcium associated with it. I think it's the highest source of calcium in a plant source. So the seeds can be eaten like quinoa, but they have those saponins again that need to be rinsed off. And from a nutritional standpoint, the plant itself is rich in omega-3 fatty acids. And these are the good fats. Omega-6s we tend to get a lot of without having to try. So we end up having an excess of them. They're not bad in their moderate form, but if we have them to the detriment of omega-3s, then that can cause imbalance issues. So you want to have a approximately even ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s. Omega-3s just tend to be more difficult to get. Other sources of omega-3s are chia seed, ground flaxseed, and there are other sources as well, but those are the two primary sources that you can get lots of them from. Selenium, potassium, phosphorus, I have selenium there twice, sodium, protein, and vitamins A, B, C, K, and folate are all present, they're present in most green leafies. But beta carotene or vitamin A has a very significant presence in lambsquarters. 11,600 IU, international units per 100 grams. That's about 3 ounces of the wet or the fresh lambsquarters. So 3 ounces is not that much really. You probably easily fill a colander with that, go to cook it, it would cook right down to almost nothing. So we have the lambsquarter's root can be crushed and used as a mild soap substitute because it has those saponins as a part of it. So here's a picture of the root. It has a nice taproot, which makes it difficult to eradicate once it has been established because it just sends that down. And because it sends that taproot so deep, it has the capacity to draw up nutrients that have been sequestered in deeper soils. Hence its ability to have a wider and more mineral dense nutritional profile. So there happen to be a variety of medicinal qualities that lambsquarters host as well. In addition to its edibility, it can help in treating scurvy. It has a high vitamin C level to it. And scurvy is something that indigenous peoples would tend to have, or others who would not have fresh fruits and vegetables, particularly leafy greens through the wintertime. Where we live, with the groceries available in our day and age, we can get adequate amounts of vitamin C on a year-round basis because it's shipped in. But the early pioneers, they would go through a period of time where they didn't have lots of vitamin C available, and they often would have bouts of scurvy. So anytime you can find vitamin C in the natural environment, when you're just living on dried things that aren't going to have as much vitamin C associated with them, that's a good thing to know about. So other nutritional diseases, basically based on the high levels of vitamins and minerals associated with it. Fresh poultices are very helpful in soothing burns. Just crush the leaves, apply it, and cover, kind of wrap it on. The poultice of the fresh leaves that have been simmered, just that nice kind of soupy mash, is soothing for itches, rashes, various swelling. It's a very positive anti-inflammatory agent. And of course, you can actually eat the leaves as a vegetable in salads and what forth for inflammatory reduction purposes. It functions also as a mild pain reliever, analgesic, and actually is very helpful in colds and flu and respiratory issue situations. Just serve it as a food, and it can be helpful in that regard. A little bit tougher in the wintertime, which is when we tend to get those types of illnesses, largely due to the reduction in vitamin D capacity in our bodies. But if it's available, it's a very helpful thing. You could even use it dried. It also functions as a febrifuge, essentially inducing perspiration, which is helpful in flu and cold situations, and an expectorant, helping to release mucus and be able to cough it out, and antihistamine properties. A lot in the Humboldt Lambsquarters. It also, because of the fiber, can aid bowel function, helpful in colic and stomach aches, and is actually very good to eat right along with beans because it helps to neutralize the gas that's produced from bean consumption. So it neutralizes the carbohydrates that are being broken down into flatulent gas. A fresh poultice of the simmered leaves is very helpful for gout and arthritis because of its anti-inflammatory properties. And in the winter, you can use it as a decoction from the dried material. So a decoction is a boiled component of it that is then decanted off as opposed to an infusion. But you can use that decoction during the winter months when the fresh herb is not available. A mouthwash made from that decoction is helpful for tooth decay, minimizing tooth decay and aiding the pain if you should have tooth decay. The mouthwash, so the presence of the minerals, is beneficial, and even just chewing the leaves or directly applying it to the tooth area can be beneficial in that regard. So moving forward, we have some ways to use it. So here is a fun recipe. It's lamb's quarters cold soup. So lamb's quarters soup. You can make it from 1 cup of cashews, 1 ripe tomato that's been chopped, 1.5 to 2 cups of water, 2 to 3 cloves of garlic, teaspoon of onion powder, juice of half a lime, 1 teaspoon of agave syrup, and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. You can add some olive oil if you'd like, unless you're going oil-free. Blend those ingredients in a blender until it's smooth. And then for texture, you're going to add the lamb's quarters leaves, about 1 cup of that that's been chopped. And then a medium avocado, 1/2 of that peeled and chopped. And then 1/2 a red bell pepper cut into strips. Sounds colorful. Add that red in there, that would just really brighten it up. And then you can decorate with edible flowers and serve. So that's about a 2 to 3 person serving that this recipe provides. There's some other culinary renditions here on the right, a salad, and some of the cooked vegetables with some fresh tomatoes and garlic on it. This is from a book called Wild Edibles by Sergei Botenko. And there's another recipe here as well. Oops, I guess I didn't get that in. Okay. Our next plant that I want to talk about tonight is stinging nettle. So this is a plant that we all love to hate, but it actually has just wonderful properties associated with it that are for our benefit. And if we take care during harvest, there are lots of beneficial properties associated with stinging nettle. So we have on stinging nettles, they have small stinging hairs called trichomes, which contain formic acid and various allergic creating compounds, histamine compounds. They're on the stem and on the underside of the leaves. So you can actually touch the top of the leaves and actually pluck the leaves from the top without being stung. But those are deactivated by crushing, drying, cooking, or blending. So that renders them ineffective. So when you're collecting them, make sure you wear long sleeves and gloves during the harvest period. I've used nitrile gloves and they'll even poke through that. But you can actually neutralize the stings by putting nettle juice directly on the stings or the juice of plantain or dock. So the juice of the plant itself can have an effective remedial effect on the stings of nettle. So the part of the plant that's used is the whole entire plant. The roots, the stems, the leaves, the flowers are all part of the plant that can be used. It tends to be more tender if it's used before they're more than 2 feet high, and the tender tops can be continued to be plucked as the plant grows up later on in its lifespan, because it continues to put out new leaves throughout its life cycle. So you can pull those off the top as you go. So up in the upper right-hand corner there, you see a glandular trichome with a person's finger coming down to touch it. That'll just spike right into you and deliver its irritant into your skin that has some stinging qualities to it. But those stinging qualities are also used therapeutically, as we'll see later on. So some benefits: it aids arthritis and joint problems, has anti-inflammatory properties, that's the stinging nettles, aids blood sugar tolerance, can calm allergies, and interestingly enough, can relax sore muscles. It benefits people in anemic situations because it's high in iron, and can function as a hair tonic for helping to ameliorate dandruff, and actually reports of bringing color back to hair. You would use it just like you would spinach. So a lot like lambsquarters, you just use it like spinach. It's one of the highest protein containing plants on the planet. That and bull kelp. So spinach is a benefit of lambsquarters, actually has more protein than spinach does. The leaves taste similar to spinach when they're cooked. When they're raw, they actually taste a lot like green beans straight off the vine. So to eat the leaves raw, just roll the leaves over and crush them to deactivate the trichomes. They should be eaten before the flowers appear, the leaves, just to maintain the best flavor components. The seeds are edible, as well as the leaves, and the roots have medicinal properties, but aren't typically consumed as an edible, but more as a medicinal. So the herbal tea is made from the flowers and the dried or fresh leaves. So some of the food uses, I have used them as a substitute for spinach in a yam chickpea curry that our family enjoys. You could also use it on pizza as a substitute for spinach. If you use spinach as a vegetable topping on your pizza, you can make a pesto out of nettles and substitute spinach for lasagna, spinach and lasagnas. So here's a stinging nettle soup. Take 1 quart of water, 3 medium potatoes peeled and chopped, chop a carrot, a half pound of fresh stinging nettle that's been chopped. So you want to wear gloves when you do this, and a teaspoon of salt to taste, half a teaspoon of cayenne pepper or to taste, and if you want to use some olive oil, you're welcome to, 2 tablespoons, and then 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. Bring that water to a boil, add your potatoes, bring it to a boil, and then simmer it while you're adding the carrots. Simmer for another 10 minutes, and then add your nettles. Those nettles will just melt and wilt right down into the soup and won't even be noticeable. Simmer it for 1 minute and add your cayenne, and then you can drizzle the optional oil and the lemon juice on the bowl as you serve. So that's a nettle soup. Then there's stinging nettle walnut pesto. So here's the pesto: half cup of stinging nettle leaves, 1 cup of walnuts, 4 to 5 cloves of garlic, and a tablespoon of olive oil. And you could also substitute a tablespoon of sunflower seeds that have been soaked, 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, half a teaspoon of sea salt, and a 1/4 cup of rehydrated sun-dried tomatoes. Blend those in a blender to destroy the stingers. Then add the other ingredients and blend till smooth, and your oil and lemon juice as desired. So use it just like you would pesto, and then refrigerate the leftovers. Again, from Wild Edibles by Sergio Botenko. So nettle has a huge history of medicinal use. It's best used as a tea or a tincture medicinally. It's very excellent for allergies of all kinds, particularly hay fever. As a tincture, it usually eliminates the issues of allergies right away. Use a vegetable glycerin type of extraction. Most tinctures you could use an alcohol extraction using vodka or something like that. But if you want to stay away from the alcohol, vegetable glycerin is an effective means of doing the same thing. You can add local raw honey to assist in that. Both of those function as a great anti-inflammatory and antihistaminic agents in allergic hay fever types of hay fever reactions. It's also helpful in arthritis, gout, and inflammation. It suppresses inflammation. It flushes the toxins from the body and aids in pain reduction from these conditions. In Germany, it's used for rheumatoid arthritis therapy. It is believed that it inhibits the inflammatory cascade that's initiated and can be used in external applications. Just soak a pad in the nettle tincture and apply it to the joint surface that needs some attention. Also, you can use the fresh leaves. The stinging with the fresh leaves can restore and repair joint injury. Basically what it does is it establishes nerve activity, no kidding, because you're stinging, but also increases the circulatory system to that area because you're stimulating with a nettle. It sounds kind of brutal, but it has been shown to be a fairly effective way of helping with joint pain issues. Burns, bites, and wounds. You can use a double strength nettle tea infusion for a wash. So burn skin, sunburns, insect bites, various wounds. It has a compound called cambudaron, which aids the burn recovery. And if you're going to use an infusion, that double strength infusion, typically an infusion or a tea that you're going to drink is 1 tablespoon. But in the case of a double infusion, use 2 tablespoons of the dried or fresh nettle leaf to a cup of boiling water. Let that cool before you apply it to the skin and then allow it to dry on the skin. Because it has a high iron content, it can actually aid people with menstrual issues, with sprains, sciatica, tendonitis, and cramps. It can help to relieve those injuries and pain. Again, a pad with the tincture applied to it, used as a compress over the area that's affected, and just secure that in place with some tape or a wrap. It stimulates blood flow and aids the circulation all throughout the body. So you can use it as a tea, so that's internally, but then you can actually sting an area like the ends of your fingers if you don't have circulation going on there, or around a joint, lower extremities. Said that the Roman soldiers actually used to quap themselves with nettles to help prevent their bodies from getting too cold. Now, I'm not sure. Sometimes of the year you can have nettles that are still growing when it's cold, but if it's super cold, they're going to be well gone by that time. So anemia, cardiac insufficiency, swellings, whole body tonic, enlarged spleen. The fresh nettle juice is beneficial in that regard. Soaking and blending the whole fresh plant. So that deactivates the stingers again and makes it available for you to use as a green drink. Again, a hair rinse. It can aid color return and the shining of the hair. You can use horsetail and rosemary to boost up those qualities. And then a nettle tea infusion or tea is, again, 1 tablespoon of the crushed or dried leaves, 1 cup of boiling water, 1 tablespoon of that, and then steep that for 10 to 15 minutes. And you can drink that a couple times a day, from therapeutic as well as just regular use. If you drink it too much, it can cause constipation. One of its medicinal qualities is an antidiuretic, not diuretic, but diuretic, I guess. But the tincture can be made from fresh or dried nettle leaves. So fresh is best, but you can do it dried too. So you need a vegetable glycerin, a glass jar, and a tight lid. So fill that jar with sliced or crushed leaves, cover the contents with the glycerin and cap it, label it, and let it just soak in and infuse for 4 to 6 weeks. Shake it every day and keep the jar full of glycerin. This is more important if you're using an alcohol-based extraction method because that would tend to evaporate. Vegetable glycerin is going to hang around for a longer period of time. And then strain it through a filter, a coffee filter, something of that nature, and then use the tincture for therapeutic use, and it can store up to 5 years. So there's some special properties of nettle root. It actually is beneficial for benign hypertrophy of the prostate, so it can help reduce prostate size. But it also has the presence of something pretty unusual in it, the urtica dioica agglutinin, lectin. So it's a particular compound in the roots that activates the CD8 T cells of the immune system, also known as cytotoxic T lymphocytes. These are important immune system cells that defend against bacteria and viruses. So research has shown antiviral activity against HIV, cytomegalovirus, RSV, H1N1, and SARS-CoV. It's a potent selective inhibitor of SARS-CoV, particularly the Frankfurt 1 strain, which is probably the one that they tested. But I expect it would have similar work across all the entire spectrum of the COVID type viruses. Basically what it does is it inhibits the viral entry at later stages in the process of potential infection. The S protein or spike protein presentation. The test animals that were used, they didn't have the weight loss associated with illnesses. If they didn't have it, and they had lower lung pathology scores. In addition, they had reduced interleukin-6 or IL-6 presence in the lung tissues, which is something that is seen in the lung pathology of SARS-CoV patients, those who have been infected with that pathogen. And it actually increased the survival rate of the test animals, which were mice, by 50%. So there's some very beneficial aspects as they're discovering of the UDA, the Urtica dioica agglutinin, which is from the nettle root. So there's a list of the different articles that bear upon this point. So nettle is a very useful plant. It can be used for food, it can be used for medicine, and actually it can even be used for fiber. Here is some nettle fiber rope that has been made from the fiber. Nettle can grow to be 6 or 8 feet tall in a healthy place. And they actually have museums in Seattle, nettle fiber fish nets that could be pulled out of their archives and actually used today. They preserve so well. So God has provided so many different things in nature for us, and nettle is one of the super plants that we love to hate, but we shouldn't hate it because it is so beneficial.